Hello, and welcome to On Point. I'm Sheila Carrillo. For the first time in 20 years, the 3rd District seat on the LA Board of Supervisors representing Northridge is open. Primary elections are June 3rd, and if a candidate gets over half of the vote, he or she wins. But if not, there will be a runoff in November. Exiting Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky is one of 5 board members who enact state laws on the county level and oversee the county's budget, which this year is a proposed $26 billion. One candidate, West Hollywood Council member John Duran, says he's the most moderate candidate.
I do think that whatever is elected supervisor, and I do hope it's me, because I have a track record of keeping myself, right in the center on labor management issues, on economic development issues, in pro-business issues. Staying in the center is the best way, I think, for the county to prosper overall.
One issue for CSUN students is public transportation.
If they could fix the traffic on Nordhoff, that'd be awesome.
Better road work and traffic control. I commute here, and I can't stand the fact that they let people park on the side of the road. So then I have to stay on the far left lane and then merge over, and no one wants to move me, let me by. So I have to force my way in, and I don't like doing that. That would be nice.
Traffic sucks a lot. The freeways are really bad. There's a lot of construction all the time.
Let's go to On Point's Hannah Townsley with more.
Thank you, Nelsie. Joining me today are Bobby Shriver, who's the former Santa Monica mayor, and Sheila Kuehl, former California legislator. Relatively small number of voters come to these local elections, and sometimes incumbents run opposed. Why do you think few voters and LA residents are aware of what exactly the Board of Supervisors does? Starting with you, Bobby, can you answer that?
Well, there haven't been, yes, it's a very good question. There haven't been contested races for these seats in many years. So many people are not aware of what the county does, nor that there's an election. The election's in June, on June 3rd. People tend to think of the elections as being in November. The paper hasn't really made coverage of these offices a priority. So it's a little bit like people haven't had the energy for a while. But I think the fact that we're running in a contested election for this seat will generate, as this is doing, a little bit of public interest in the race, and maybe more people will turn out.
Okay, same question for you, Sheila.
Well, actually, we're kind of lucky because the county, unlike cities, has their election the same time as the state elections. So people will be voting for governor, they'll be voting for attorney general, treasurer, all the state offices. Every assembly member is up for re-election, half the state senators. So it's a ballot that people are interested in. And in part of the 3rd supervisorial district, there's even a contested congressional race to take Henry Waxman's place because he's retiring. So a lot more people might show up, but generally you only get out of the 1 million registered voters in the 2 million people that live in the 3rd district, you might get 150,000 at the most. And I hope that people will pay more attention because the interesting thing is the county has a lot of responsibilities that people don't know anything about. Healthcare and mental health and foster kids, transportation, environmental protection, just a whole panoply of issues.
Okay. Now, the current LA County Supervisor, Zev Yaroslavsky, has said the decisions made by supervisors are life or death, dealing with the issues, as you just mentioned, surrounding healthcare, child protective services, jails, and law enforcement, to name a few. He also mentioned that he had sleepless nights over the decisions made. What does it mean to you when a locally elected official has so much power to decide where the money is spent, and how will you handle that responsibility? If you could answer that, Sheila, first.
Well, as I tell people, somebody has to do it. I mean, the government has the responsibility for caring for people, a lot of people who really can't care for themselves. 1 million poor people get their health care through the county. So how the health department handles their 4 hospitals and their many, many clinics is very important. 250,000 people a year get their mental health treatment through the county. And we're all reading about foster kids. 26,000 foster kids in the system, 13,000 that we're trying to keep out of the system. So I think the great thing about public policy is that you have to develop the skills and the knowledge base to try to put together all the information you give, and most important of all, make decisions. They do keep you up at night. But I used to say when I was in the legislature, they give you a red button for no and a green button for yes. They don't give you a beats the heck out of me button. You really have to make the decision.
And same question for you, Bobby.
I think it's a tough question. I know when I was working on homelessness, when I learned that a particular soldier had died in a dumpster in West LA, I felt responsible for that, and it kept me up for several nights. I think when you think about all these large numbers and large systems, when it comes down to a particular individual, particularly as I've worked a lot in homelessness and veterans homelessness of both men and women veterans, the idea that particular individuals who I've come to know are sleeping in their cars or at risk of further homelessness or suffering from mental illness and are not getting treatment it keeps you up at night, but it also makes you pretty outraged. And I think that's part of the emotion that I'm sure has motivated both of us and some of our colleagues to run for these offices, is that the current state of play needs significant reform. As Sheila mentioned, these numbers of people who are being served, a lot of these people are not being served well. We have 3,000, I think it is, children under 3 in foster care. The ratio of social workers to those kids is 40 to 1. It should be 15 to 1. We have 7,000 homeless vets on any given night in LA, and we have the biggest VA facility in the country in West LA, and no new beds have been built on that facility, even though we're fighting 2 wars. So there are significant positive opportunities. You could say there are challenges, but there are also positive opportunities to put a little urgency into the planning of matters so that those beds are created for people. And I'm looking forward to myself the urgency of the issue, because if you work in a very quick way, I think speaking for myself, I have less sleepless nights because then I feel like I'm really making something happen now rather than waiting for things to happen.
Okay, so let's talk about these issues. Now, reading the newspapers and walking through the neighborhoods, we see mentally ill veterans who are homeless, as well as other citizens in Los Angeles, which are huge issues. Now, what should the county do to ease those problems? Bobby, let's start with you.
Well, one of the first things it should do is vigorously lobby in Washington, D.C. The county has lobbyists who lobby on behalf of transit issues, but they have never lobbied on behalf of veterans issues. Since the VA has an enormous federal budget, obviously, we should be doing more professional lobbying of people to get the VA to meet its responsibilities on a county-wide basis, and certainly in the 3rd District. The second thing I think is very important, and I think we agree on this, is the county should, with its boomerang funds coming out of redevelopment and other financing facilities, try to cause a lot of supported housing to be built. The best way for people to not become homeless is if they have housing that's safe and where they have services in the building, particularly for people who need significant mental health care services. The county hasn't done a great job in building those facilities, but it needs to work with the cities. There are 88 cities in the county of Los Angeles, including the city of Los Angeles, and they have various facilities for building affordable housing. When redevelopment went away, the governor got rid of redevelopment. That created a real crisis, and then that combined with the financial crisis has led to a significant lack of affordable housing units that would keep people from becoming homeless. And since prevention is always cheaper than treatment once people have become homeless, I hope, if I'm elected, to significantly increase the supply of affordable housing with services related to it.
And same question for you.
Well, it's interesting. Over decades, there's been a terrific separation between people who work with the homeless population, who have thought primarily shelter, temporary shelter, maybe transitional housing, and the people who are concerned about affordable housing, keeping people in their housing. In the last 10 years, there's been a significant shift, and the county has been actually, in its own way, a big part of that. I mean, the VA is important, but it's got a very small footprint in West Los Angeles. It can't possibly house all of the homeless vets, and it hasn't even started doing its housing yet. The more important thing is the new transition, the connection between the homeless population and getting them into permanent supportive housing, which blends then with the whole advocacy about temporary and then permanent housing for poor people. So it becomes more of a blend. Thousands of units have actually opened up this year, both for the chronically homeless population who need a lot of services, and many of the campuses that have been built are bringing the services right to the homeless population so that they can stay where they are. They don't go to the emergency rooms. They get a lot more support. And those who are newly homeless, who are under a program called rapid rehousing, where all you need to do is make sure that they don't spend more than a couple of nights on the street before they're back into a place. The county has actually opened a number of units, participated with the city of LA in opening a number of units, and the plan is they're participating in a national plan to permanently house 100,000 homeless people by the end of this June. They've been working on it for some time. I think the county is doing better and better. The problem is the county is so stovepiped in terms of its agencies that often they don't work with each other, health and housing and mental health. And I think that's the job of a supervisor, is to make certain that people work together not only within the county, but with the city, especially the city of LA, which is 40% of the county.
Okay. Now, moving on, the county is supposed to watch over children, and the Child Protection Services Agency has been plagued by tragedy and mismanagement for decades. A recent audit had suggested reform. Are the suggestions enough? Let's start with you, Bobby.
Well, the number one suggestion there, as your viewers may not be fully aware of, the Blue Ribbon Commission report, is to put all those services under one person, the so-called czar. I think we may have a little disagreement on whether that's a good idea. I'm not quite sure. But I favor that because I favor transparency as to who's responsible and accountability. Right now, many of the services are in different silos and different people are responsible. So something terrible happens and no one really knows who to hold accountable. I think we have to change that. The second thing I think that's a smart idea is what they call performance-based contracting, which means that if I'm a contractor to the county to deliver services, I get paid if you get better. Whereas the current system is I get paid for services, so as I perform services for you, I get paid. I don't get paid if you get better. So there needs to be a reversal in the way the money is distributed so that contractors are trying to get people better and out of the system rather than hold them in the system and get paid. I think that's a very significant thing. It sounds very simple. It's been implemented in Chicago and Tennessee. There's a tremendous school at the University of Chicago of social work which has designed this system, and I think it ought to come to LA soon.
And with you, Sheila.
Well, we've had a number of debates in which we've agreed and or disagreed on things, but I don't think we do disagree on the recommendation, the primary recommendation of the Blue Ribbon Task Force. I think the only thing we've talked about in terms of whether a czar would work is actually how much power such a person has. I assume they would be on an equal level with department heads, but you would be taking some of the department heads' bailiwick and putting it into a different department. It could be moving the deck chairs on the Titanic. It could be a really good idea. For the Department of Children and Family Services, there's been 18 directors in 15 years. I mean, people are failing. To some extent, they're set up to fail. There's insufficient support, insufficient resources. As Bobby said, the social workers have enormous caseloads. We need more social workers, but also the workers who work with the social workers, who don't have those master's degrees, but they transport the children from one place to another. They write the basic reports. We also need a lot more of them. In terms of deciding that someone only gets paid if the person in their care gets better, I think you put it. I've always had a little bit of a problem with that because would that be foster parents? And we don't know whether they would actually be able to guarantee that the child that they're fostering wouldn't, get into trouble again, et cetera. I do like the idea, however, of putting more experienced social workers on what they call the back end, which is the home visits, the evaluations of the families. Right now, it's the brand new social workers that get assigned to that. The older social workers are also doing very important work. They have to assess, is this child in such danger? We need to take him or her away right away. That's important, but I think that division needs more of a mix.
Okay. All right, moving on. Now, John Duran has said that he wants to boost funding for arts and culture in Los Angeles. Should this be a priority for the Board of Supervisors? Let's start with you, Sheila.
It should definitely be a priority, but it's not, it's sort of beyond what people would think of as arts and culture in terms of, oh, I go to something and I enjoy it. That's a very important thing. LA County is actually the only county in the United States that owns its theaters and operates its theaters. So if you're raising money for performance, you don't have to worry, is the rent going to be paid and, is it maintenance? And of course, the LAC in LACMA is LA County Museum, right? But the most important pieces are access by the public, affordability. I mean, the Hammer Museum, which is private, just went all free, no entry fee anymore. I'd love to see the county do that, and I think we can with the museums and some of the matinees put on through the county. But even more important, maybe, in the arts and culture community is what's happening in terms of jobs. You know, you want to have a job in media. That's arts and culture. There are lots of students, lots of young people, lots of people move here for those jobs. We need to make certain that that arts and culture community can develop, especially the new content arenas, which are not even TV and movie anymore. It's, you know, online on your phone. So I think we have a real opportunity for the county to make a significant investment in attracting these jobs.
Okay. And for you, Bobby?
I agree with what Sheila just said. I think one of the things that LACMA has done very cleverly is to take teachers from the K through 12 system in LAUSD, and this could be moved on to the other districts in the county, and teach them how to teach subjects from an artistic perspective. So it's not teaching art. Like if I were a math teacher, I could go through this program, learn about an artistic way to teach math or English or some other subjects. This has shown, as I understand it, some pretty good outcomes. I think that way of disseminating the county's arts infrastructure, the staff of LACMA and other staffs that work in the arts institutions that the county funds, is a smart idea. I think there's a tremendous deficit in the K through 12 education system of arts education itself, which is a second, not directly in the purview, so to speak, of the supervisors, but a real crisis. It's a requirement under state law, and yet most people in the K through 12 system don't get much arts education. That's why I think we're both looking forward to an arts discussion on Wednesday night that we're going to have over at LACMA. I think the Hollywood Bowl $1 seats is one of the great things in LA. I know I went there a lot when I was a young newspaper reporter. And the other assets that the county has in the artistic community, as Sheila was saying, are very significant. I think the thing that drew me to LA, I'm an immigrant here, was the tremendous sense of imagination that you got here when I was, whatever I was, 22, 23 years old. I first came here. Someone said once that more people in Los Angeles make their living off their imagination than anywhere else in the world. I think part of what John, I think, was saying was that we want to keep that energy here. We want to keep the imagination business alive and strong, and I think the county and its leadership with these institutions should be doing a lot to make that happen.
Okay. All right. And we had just discussed a little bit about unemployment, and there's a lot of issues surrounding labor and unemployment. So how bad is unemployment in the 3rd District? And if any of you are voted supervisor, what will you do to address it? Let's start with you, Sheila, because you had mentioned that. Well,
you know, it's interesting to me. People sometimes complain about the number of people who work for government, as though there should be fewer and fewer people employed. And yet, if you look at what the county does and the services it provides, virtually every one of us has gone to the county for something, and sometimes we don't even know it's the county that we went to for a permit or for a license or for an inspection. And we have 100,000 people working for the county. That's an important workforce. And I think that's an important aspect of avoiding unemployment. I have never liked this idea, you know, slash it by 10% just because we don't want any public workers. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I grew up in a working class family over by the Coliseum, and we kind of rolled up our sleeves and did a lot of work. My dad was a sort of a one-man window display group himself, building models and putting merchandise in department store windows. That's what he did. And I think people really want to have jobs. And where jobs have gone, a lot of people are complaining, oh, it's the tax structure. Oh, they're fleeing the state. But even Toyota, who's moving to Texas, said very clearly on the front page of our local newspaper this morning, no, we're not going because of any tax issues. It's an efficiency thing for us because we want to consolidate everything we're doing. So I think what we need to do is to make certain that the county participates where it can in bringing more jobs here. Not only the industry jobs, bringing movie jobs back, but also green jobs, which I think we have a very good possibility of doing.
Okay, and the same question for you, Bob.
I think it's pretty bad, actually. I think we've lost 200,000 jobs here in LA in the last 20 years. That's not a result of the recession. That's the result of capital, private capital, leaving the area. So, for example, I'm a little more maybe upset than Sheila is about Toyota leaving. I think we should have competed to keep them here. I think I was upset about Boeing leaving, even though Boeing is not in the 3rd district. I think the region needs to attract and keep the private employers who are here. I think in this district, in the northeast part of the district, in Pacoima and so forth, there's significant unemployment, including significant youth unemployment. And I hope that, that somehow we'll be able to figure out a way to bring private investment into those areas in manufacturing and other kinds of good-paying middle-class jobs. I think, as Sheila mentioned, in green, there's tremendous opportunities, particularly in water engineering. We're in a drought, but there's a lot of water underground, particularly here in the San Fernando Valley, and extracting and using that water, I think, is an important policy goal for the county and for the whole region. In Santa Monica, when I was on the city council, we sued the oil companies, got the money, built the water treatment plant, and today 70% of the drinking water in Santa Monica comes from wells that are in Santa Monica. So it's a possibility that the region would have significant water locally in the future, but it needs to be planned for. The cities need to be coordinated. There's a significant stormwater aspect to all of that, and I just driving around here today see a lot of the things that this university is doing to improve its treatment and handling of stormwater, permeable paving and so forth. I think those kinds of technologies need to be emphasized, and I think there are a lot of great jobs in emphasizing those technologies. LA should be a leader in those kinds of technologies, and I hope to work so that it will be and that the jobs will appear here and not go to Texas, even if people say, well, it's an efficiency thing. It drives me really crazy to see those 4,000 jobs leave town.
Okay. Let's move on to the next question. Now, we know by living in Los Angeles County, transportation is a major issue. As part of the supervisor's job, it is to serve on the Board of Metro. What would be your goal if you were voted supervisor to improve traffic and public transportation? Let's start with you, Sheila.
Well, I think the light rail essentially coming back to Los Angeles, because as you know, we used to have an entire streetcar system and the Red Line, and it was very different when people could take public transportation. So I like to see LA kind of returning to a time, which it is, where we'll be able to take public transit. And for the San Fernando Valley, it's even more important because the valley is transit poor in many ways. One of the main ways in which it's transit poor is getting from north to south across the mountains. And so in the new extension of Measure R, which is a tax measure that we'll be able to vote on when it's put on the ballot, one of the proposals is for a line from the valley all the way to LAX through the Sepulveda Pass. That would be a very high priority because most of it will be in the 3rd district, and I think the 3rd district supervisor is going to have to really be for it. There will also be a lot of construction jobs, and those jobs, though they don't last forever, they seem to, if you live along the 405, they seem to last forever, and they're going to be very important jobs. Incidentally, the 3,000 jobs that were lost with Toyota was partly because Toyota got a $40 million tax credit. I think for $40 million, we could fund more than 3,000 jobs. So, you know, it's always a balance about what you're going to do. It seems sometimes that businesses ask a lot in order to keep only a few jobs here. The other thing with transportation, I think, is that in the Northeast Valley, we also need a north-south line. Those are going to be 2 priorities for me. Okay.
And for you, Bobby?
So I agree with what Sheila just said. Those large capital projects are very significant. Managing them in an on-time and on-budget way, I think I have significant experience in doing those kinds of not projects of transit, but just managing large capital projects. One of the near-term things that worked for us in Santa Monica was to give all students at Santa Monica College free access to the bus system by showing their student ID. I know when I've been up here, some of the students have told me that although there's a subsidy, you need to get a special pass. You need to pay, I think it's $16 a month for the use of the bus 5 days a week. And I think that should stop. I think you should work, the administration of this university should work with its supervisor to get students that they show their ID, they get on a bus, they ride anywhere, anytime. That's the system we have in Santa Monica, and even though that hasn't solved the traffic problem heading east at night, it certainly has made a significant contribution to offloading the roads there and to decreasing the amount of money being spent on new parking structures. I know from talking to your administration here that they had thought that they would have had to build new parking structures when the student count went to a certain level, and you haven't had to do that here because more students are taking public transit. I think the transit facility that's out here now that just got built with the federal money is a good first step, but I think it should be expanded for all of the community college and state universities, and for that matter, college systems in this whole area, because Metro is trying to serve all these people, and they have bus assets on the road right now. The subway to the airport is great. It's 10 or 15 years away. In the near term, I'd like to get students onto the bus.
Okay. All right. So moving on, we're actually about to finish pretty soon. Just briefly, Sheila, you have a background being a Hollywood child actor, and then you went on to work in public policy and government. With your variety of experience in all, what makes you a good fit for LA County Supervisor?
Well, the major responsibilities of an LA County Supervisor, I know you know there are 10 million people in LA County. If it were a state, it would be the 8th largest state. And it's 5 people comprising both the executive and the legislative branch. And the major responsibilities are health care, mental health, foster kids, transportation, environmental protection, the arts, housing, homelessness. These are issues that we have dealt with for years in the state, at least in the macro. The committees that I've chaired, the committees upon which I've served, are all involved with those issues. So I think I have a depth of understanding of the issues, which are very complex, health care and foster kids. Okay, and I just want to say one last thing, and I think that's why CSUN Young Democrats endorsed me.
Okay. All right, and the last question's for you, Bobby. Now, we all know that you come from a wealthy family who also has a political background, but you yourself have been a journalist, an attorney, and you also worked on the city council in Santa Monica, as well as working in the entertainment industry as well. With your variety of experience in all, what makes you a good fit for LA County Supervisor?
Well, I think I've had some significant startup and I would say executive experience. I've funded and started philanthropies and companies. I think the kind of problem solving that happens when you try to start things is a significant asset. I also feel I've been a problem solver in the things that I started. I started them not just to have fun, but to actually solve problems, whether it was in HIV work in Africa, where we started our RED campaign, where we made a brand, sold products, took the money and bought HIV medicines for Africans who didn't have the money, or in Santa Monica, where we cleaned up the beach by putting a storm drain underneath the pier. It had been the most polluted beach in the state. These were intractable problems that people said couldn't be solved, and I solved them. So I think I'm a problem solver, and I've got a record of doing that. I think that's why I'm good.
Thank you both for joining us, and thank you for watching. For all of us here at On Point, I'm Hannah Townsley.